Today's the day.
Welcome to Primetime Mitch, guys. It's another quick review. It'll last for a while. I've seen all my cinematic releases I need to see for the time being. And today's review is going to be on The Woman in the Yard, directed by John Colette-Serra. I had an unusual reaction coming out of the cinema to this. I posted that on Instagram a couple of weeks ago. And I've been mulling over what to say about this one because I'm mixed. I'll go through what I liked about it, and then I'll obviously discuss the interpretations that are floating about out there, and I'll see if I can make some sense of it. Hay fever's kicking in, so apologies for the voice and the stuffiness in my tone. Just to let you know, there will be spoilers here, so if you haven't seen The Woman in the Yard, especially if you don't want to know anything about the conclusion, skip this. Just watch my quick out-of-theatre review on Instagram. And it's also here in the shorts as well. So just check that out if you haven't seen this yet and come back and watch this after you have. So spoiler alert, there it is. Let's go. All right. So this movie is centered immediately around Ramona and her two children, Taylor and Annie. They are living in a remote farmhouse, and it's clear from the off that Ramona is widowed. She is looking at footage of her talking to her husband, and she is in a knee brace. She is on crutches. She's obviously been injured in an accident, and her husband has not been so lucky. You get that straight away. What's clear from the off is I'm looking at this character that Danielle Deadwyler is playing, and she's, by the way, her performance in this is very, very good. I will say that. But the character is grossly unlikable. She's obviously had this trauma, so you don't want to make too many judgments straight away, but the kids are basically fending for themselves. Their mum is upstairs, incapacitated, but also feeling a lot of guilt, loneliness, what have you, but she still has two kids there to look after, and you find straight away that she is not paid the electric bill, so they've cut the power off. She's run her own phone down watching these videos, so she can't communicate with anybody to try and help the situation. They have no food in the house. The dog is eating food from the fridge that's probably not good for it and throwing it up, and immediately you just get this sense that she is abandoning her responsibilities off the back of this trauma. And obviously trauma affects people in different ways, and I appreciate that, and obviously as we go into this movie we'll find out the effects of it and the effects of the state of the human mind. But you still feel as though you feel terrible sympathy for these kids, and especially Taylor, who's the older child, who's sort of looking after his sister and trying to do all the jobs that his mum can't do. You do have the angsty teenager in this. I presume he's a teenager now, so that's sort of something that we do see an awful lot of, but you get the feeling throughout that he's sort of well within his rights to be like that. The little girl's adorable. She plays a nice part, you know, as young kids do. You know, they get a pass really when it comes to the performances, but I don't know, I'm divided on Taylor the son, because I think he actually had a really good point for being pissed off for most of this. I'm not going to do this in any particular order. It was a couple of weeks ago when I watched it, so I'm going to try and remember what I watched in order, but bear with me. If I miss anything out, you know where the comments are. But basically Taylor comes back into the house and says to his mother, you know, there's a woman in the yard. And that's what we see. This woman, and she's sat out there on this seat, and she has got a black veil over her face. You can't see her, and she is just sat very quietly and calmly in the yard. Ramona hobbles outside to talk to her, and the woman seems to know an incredible amount about her, and this makes Ramona very apprehensive and a little scared, so she goes back in and says, oh, it doesn't matter, kids, just leave her there, she'll go eventually, it's okay, it's fine. And she sort of starts inching a bit closer to the house each time, which I think is a really cool, quite creepy little effect. Keeps that sense of dread, you know, the closer she gets to the house, the more of a threat she is. Where before she just looks like a harmless, maybe crazy person sat in the yard, she now is a threat to the family. But what this movie does is make you realise, after a while, that this woman in the yard is a manifestation of Ramona's mental state. It's her psyche in front of them. The trouble I've got with this is, if this is a manifestation of Ramona's psyche and she is sort of carrying this burden around with her, how much disbelief am I supposed to suspend that the children can see her? Because it's either a true monster to deal with and an apparition that everyone has to deal with, or it's something that Ramona's struggling with herself and it's sort of symbolism. I don't think it can be both. I don't know why the kids would see this woman if this is something that Ramona is dealing with and you're trying to push us in that direction to make us realise this isn't actually a real entity. This is a manifestation of this woman's problems and struggles. I'm fine with that. It would be great maybe if the kids were sort of in another room and Ramona saw the woman in the yard and went, kids, don't go outside, don't go near the windows, don't look out there. And then you find out later that they can't see her, but Ramona can. That would have made more sense. I know I'm skipping ahead a bit here, but really there's not an awful lot going on in this movie, bar what happens in the house between the family. So I'm trying to sort of skip to the part that sort of bothers me a little bit, and we can maybe tie in some of the stuff along the way. But as far as I was concerned, when the kids can see her, it's now a physical spirit and an apparition and even a monster. But once I've established that and I've got that in my head that everyone can see her, I can't then go, oh, it's just Ramona's conscience or it's her psyche. I don't think you can do both. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe that's how I like my movies. Somebody else might have a better explanation. I encourage you to throw it in the comments for me. It's what it's all about, discussion. But it does stand to reason, saying that is her psyche, that Ramona has this tremendous guilt. She's carrying it around with her. She's also pretty terrible to her kids, really, the way she speaks to them. Taylor is quite rightly getting wound up with his mother's sort of contradictions and the nonsensical decisions she seems to make. Like when she says, no, you can't go out and walk to the neighbour's house to get help. You're staying here. And I understood at first. I was like, why can't you drive there? It's only a couple of miles and I'm sure he could. Then I find out that she can't. The car doesn't work. So that was sort of quashed a little bit. But I didn't understand why he couldn't just walk down to the nearest house. They've been fending for themselves all this time. Why does it matter if he walks a couple of miles to the neighbours? So that was sort of bothering me throughout as well. I was getting a bit fed up of her character at this point. But I did still want to know more about what happened on the night with her husband and what's driven her to become like this. Of course, Taylor goes out and confronts the woman. So obviously he's having a conversation with this person. And she tells Taylor, your mother's not told you the truth about the night your father died. And you find out that Ramona was actually driving the car because in the flashback sequence, she is talking to her husband over a meal and she is just miserable. Now, this is I was watching this going, this does not look like the happy couple we saw at the beginning. They've both made a mutual decision to travel out to this farmhouse, to start a life there with the kids, to raise animals, and they've got this beautiful land around them they can convert. He wants to name the house. She thinks it's a silly idea, obviously. He is just more enthusiastic. But this is obviously a mutual decision they've made. So now she's going back on it and saying, I'm looking after the kids and the dog and the chickens and everything like that. But again, I'm trying to find sympathy here because this looks like a decision they've made as a couple and she's sort of angry about it. Then when they get in the car in the flashback sequence and she is driving and they're arguing and she sees the woman in the rear view mirror. Now that suggests that she was already depressed and she was already in a poor mental state at the time, even before the accident. So she existed all the time. So we sort of understand why she's quite an unhappy person. But again, if this is just sort of an apparition that appears to her and it sort of is influencing her mind all the time, I still don't understand why the children had to see her. I'm starting to look at Ramona and think, you had this unfortunate issue during your marriage and now you feel guilt over what's happened to your husband. But really I'm looking at it and thinking you didn't want this life in the first place. This is why you had the argument with him. This isn't your ideal life. So, and that's what comes across in the way she parents her children. So I'm struggling with her. Now, before I go on to the conclusion of this where I had the most problems, I want to point out that this movie is brave. It tackles subjects that are taboo and are very difficult for most people to speak about. We are becoming increasingly more aware of mental health and trauma and how it's okay not to be okay. I completely am all right with those subjects being addressed. I have had these problems myself. You know, I attend support groups that are wonderful, and I appreciate that this movie wants to tackle that. The thing is, I don't know how to rate this as a horror, because really this is a deep issue that I think could have been brilliant in a short movie about the subject. I think this was the wrong platform to do it on. And I also think that the message that this sends out inevitably is probably not great. So that's where I'm going to just say that I'm going to go into the ending of this movie now and talk about it openly, but at the same time, I do appreciate the subject being looked at, the subject being tackled, but I'm not sure this was how you do it. The ending to me is massively jumbled. There are so many flashback sequences, real, not real, sort of conundrums to work out. Ramona in place of the woman in the yard, the woman in the yard in place of Ramona. You don't know what's real, what's not. It's a lot to deal with when the film has been very minimal throughout. You have just had this family in the house and the woman in the yard, and then suddenly you're hit with this cacophony of chaos at the end. And I'm not sure whether that is not hampering the message somewhat. But at the same time, I suppose when you are in a particularly damaging mental state, you really don't know what's real or what's not, or you sort of are a bit disillusioned and not working with reality. So I understand that, but at the same time, it's still a lot to ask for the audience to understand what direction you're going with this. The woman in the yard sort of appears in the house as in sort of a shadow magic kind of way. They end up taking refuge in the attic. There's all this sort of supernatural stuff going on. Ramona sees herself sat in the chair like the woman talking to herself. Again, that sort of, I think, is trying to hammer home the message that this is her psyche. But again, it's something the kids are experiencing visually. I mean, even a situation where they weren't seeing the woman in the yard, but they were dealing with the mother reacting in that way, and basically all the way through, they're dealing with her while she's dealing with the woman. That would have made more sense to me, but they were reacting to the woman. So I couldn't get that out of my head the whole way through. Eventually, after a couple of moments where you see the woman with a wound on the side of her head, and it's quite like a gruesome imagery, it's quite a nice effect as well. And I will say some of this movie was shot quite nicely. You end up with this situation where the woman in the yard has taken over Ramona, and she is basically revealing herself fully now to be the mental state that Ramona is in. She is that manifestation of depression. And at this point, I'm sort of going, right, I see what you've done here in that sense. I'll try and ignore the 𝐾𝐨𝐮'𝐫𝐞 and all that kind of stuff. I will just go with what you're going with for now. Are we going to see her fight against it? And we find out that this entity is pushing her towards ending it all. And at this point, I'm going, right, I get what they're doing, because this is sort of showing how it grips you, how it tells you that you aren't a good person, you aren't needed, you aren't wanted, you aren't strong enough, people would be better off without you. I get that that is being portrayed here, that this is the kind of pressure that somebody with chronic depression is suffering with. They are being put under this awful pressure of every day is a burden, not only to you, but to the people around you. That message, again, is very powerful and very real. The trouble is, I'm not sure how good a message it is to send out without the fight, without the positive side of the battle. I'm not one for sugarcoating things and telling lies and not being dishonest, and I always like things to be raw and real. But I think this movie, for the direction it went in, I think it needed it. The woman in the yard questions Ramona. She says, every day you pray for me. You pray for strength. And then while Ramona says, yes, I pray for the strength to carry on, the entity and the woman in the yard says, no, you wanted the strength to end it. And there's this awful scene, which again will divide opinion, where she is holding a lighter up to the photographs on the wall of her kids, and it shows them years down the line as a vet. You know, the young boy is a vet, and the young girl is like graduating and things like that. But again, in the back of my mind, I'm going, really? They're on their own in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, somewhere you didn't want to be because you didn't think that life was great. How could you leave them in that situation? How is it better for them? How do they go on to become scholars if they are struggling to look after themselves now? and you're just going to leave them devastated and alone. So again, that's just my take on it. I can appreciate people going, well, I've been in that situation and that's how it feels. You don't think clearly at that point. I totally understand that. I'm just looking at it from my view and experience. That's all I can give you as an honest review from my side, with absolutely, hopefully, no ignorance whatsoever. The bit that really, really grated me and got me angry towards the end of this, in amongst the confusion, was how she says to the spirit, can I say goodbye to my kids first? Now, I'm a father. I don't like scenes like this anyway. It really gets to me, and I am very deeply affected a lot of the time by situations that I fear personally myself. And like I said, I've been in very dark places before, so I do sort of appreciate what's being shown. But this got to me. Can I say goodbye to my kids first? Yes. And when she goes downstairs to tell the kids to go to the neighbour's house, something he could have done a long time before, she doesn't say goodbye to them. She berates them. Go. Get out. Go. Just listen to me. Shut up. Go. And the last thing she does, instead of actually saying goodbye to them like she requested, is just shout at them. And she is angry with them. And that's her last words. And that was the bit that really pushed me with this movie, that really made me go, you're going to have to really pull this around, because this is pissing me the off. They go, they leave, and then the spirit takes over Ramona. It sort of gets hold of the gun that she's kept throughout the movie with the one bullet in there, and it sort of cocks it for her and gets her in place. And I'm just sat there going, this is the shit. This ending is exactly how I didn't want it to go. And although there is nothing wrong with raw and real, I think certain things need an uplifting finish. This needed an uplifting finish so much. Then the next shot, the kids come back, and Ramona is hobbling towards the door. She opens the door and she is reunited with the kids, and now she's loving towards them and she's hugging them, and the dog is back and the power comes back on, and suddenly there's a name on the house, Iris Haven, and they say, like, what about the woman in the yard? Oh, she's gone for now, but if she comes back, I know what to do. And you think, thank God for that. That is a great message, that we can overcome demons, we can overcome that darkness and that depression, that there is hope out there, that it can be, this can go either way, but there is a hope. Like I said, not every movie has to have a happy ending, but some movies need it. Then this is the talking point, the painting. We know that Ramona would paint in her spare time. That's what she used to like doing. We look at this painting of her, and then there's a woman in the yard. You can see that she's painted this image based around what she's thinking and how she's feeling. But then they zoom down and the signature is backwards. Now, I've not mentioned in this review yet about Annie and her writing, and she's learning to write and she keeps putting the R's backwards, very Red Rum style. And she has had to be continuously corrected by her brother and her mother. But her mother eventually loses patience. The hump goes forwards. And I think that was very symbolic, that, you know, the R backwards means she's still looking at the past and feeling the guilt of the past instead of moving forward and looking to the future. And she's almost angry at her child for not looking forward and not facing it the right way because she can't. And that's all she does all the way through the movie, really, is take it out on her kids. And I can appreciate that goes on. But the whole name at the end is spelt backwards. And that tells you, essentially, that this perfect little ending that we've seen isn't real. And that she actually probably went through with it. Now, some people interpret it differently. That maybe she signed it like that to remind herself, you know, maybe even to connect with her daughter more. You know, remember when you used to sign your R's backwards all the time? Well, I did it for you and all that. That's a nicer way of thinking about it, but I'm pretty sure that's not how it is. And it's an awful message. As well, they show her happy with the kids, happy with the farmhouse. Like, that's the ideal life. It wasn't her ideal life. The reason she stormed out of the restaurant and had the crash was because she didn't want this life. She wanted to work in the city. She didn't want this burden of the animals and the children. So that ideal life to me was false. So I don't know. I don't really think I'll ever watch this again. If I do, it will be to try and understand it better. Maybe if somebody puts something in the comments that I can look for, I might give it a go again. But overall, I was disappointed with how this movie led us down that path and then gut punched at the end. Like I said, not everything has a happy ending. Some of the best movies in the world have terrible endings in terms of the plight of the characters, etc. But I think this one really needed a little glimmer of hope. It took us close enough to know that this can go the wrong way. And I'm pretty sure that many of us in our lives and many people have suffered the negative side and the negative end of chronic depression. I think this movie needed to tell us something upbeat and positive, especially since there was no real redemption arc for that character. The character throughout wasn't likable, so I wasn't rooting for her. I was more rooting for the kids than anything. So I didn't really care enough about Ramona, and I wasn't enough in her court. I wasn't enough in her corner to then see that ending as anything other than disappointing. And if I'm caring for the welfare of the kids more than the main character, then they've been screwed over as well at the end. So where I think its messages were very powerful, very brave, I don't think they were executed in the way they should have been. And it's sad really, because I think this movie had a lot going for it otherwise. The trailer was very good, very minimal. I liked the trailer because it didn't give a lot away. That's how I work now. If a trailer seems to be heading in a direction where it's showing me too much, I turn it off, or I walk out, or I shut my eyes and la la la. I didn't have a problem with the way this was marketed until I saw the movie. And now I think you promised a horror and went into a territory that was something very different, and a very real horror that I think enough work's been done on already that it doesn't need that. It's almost exploitative, maybe. Short movie would have worked with a powerful message. It was dragged on far too long. It could have been a short movie, could have been a TV movie, but not a cinematic release. So it was nicely shot, so the acting was very good. But those are the two things that really stand out as positives. The rest of it, I could do without. Well, guys, that's my review of Woman in the Yard. That's probably one of the hardest ones I've ever had to review, because I had to be brutally honest in an area which I am very understanding of. So if you agree with anything I've said and you want to leave a comment below as your interpretation of this movie, maybe even what this movie did for you. Was it something that helped you and helped you cope, or was it something that was sort of almost a trigger? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for being patient with my dissection of that movie, and thank you very much for tuning into Primetime Itch. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to smash a like down below. All your subscriptions are very welcome, and that notification bell, just make sure that's turned on for more videos in the future. My quick reviews are done for now. I think I'm going to go on to some rankings and reviews and some comparison videos and some very exciting interviews coming up in the next couple of weeks. So please stay tuned for that. Thank you for your support. This has been Mitch Cassidy, Primetime Mitch, signing out.